guys, welcome back to another video. I'm going to be talking about a bunch of books that I've read and really loved or enjoyed that are all set in England. The inspiration behind this video is that, as you can see, because I had posted it first, I finally got up my UK trip vlog. It took me over a year to get that up and I am embarrassed about it. Let's just say that was a point of contention in my marriage because my husband was like, when are you going to get this video up? For some reason, vlogs are really hard for me to edit. It's the music, like finding the right sound to match the vibe and then editing it and like the transitions. It's so much easier to just film a sit down video than it is to film a vlog, let alone a travel vlog. For me has always been really hard, but I finally did it. The vlog is up finally a year later. I did also make another video right after my trip about traveling and reading. It was a tag and I showed my UK book haul, so I'll link that above. Again, over a year ago, and it took me to finally put this vlog together, but I'm glad I have it. It's more of like a memory. I know some people don't care about travel vlog, but that was where I originally started making videos on YouTube, was dancing and making travel videos with my friends. But in honor of finally getting that vlog up and in honor of the trip that was so much fun, I have a ton more like photos and videos that I posted on my Instagram, and I have a highlight story saved there. But that trip was so fun and I wanted to make a little bookish video about some of my favorite reads that are set in England. Let's get into the books. I broke them down by category as usual. I'm gonna start with historical fiction. First up, Jennifer Robson's The Gown. This is the first book of hers I've read. I also read The Coronation Year, which I would also recommend. So this one has some multiple perspectives and it centers around the embroiderers and sewers who made Queen Elizabeth's wedding gown and their stories. It was a great story of friendship, overcoming the odds. I really enjoyed it as far as World War II historical fiction goes that's set in England. Also earlier this year, I read The Coronation Year by the same author, and this centers around Queen Elizabeth's coronation and a little bed and breakfast hotel owner and her love life and some different characters that come into the picture as well. And that was a really lovely story. I guess I should say a lot of these books I chose because the setting is very prominent and it's featured in the book and it's like obvious that the setting plays a role. So those are in London, and the next few I also have for historical fiction are also in London. The next one being Dear Mrs. Bird by A.J. Pierce. This was an absolute favorite that I read a couple years back. This one just hit me in the right time and the right frame of mind. This is a mix of it being absolutely tragic and heartbreaking, but also really beautiful and funny at the same time. There's like funny wit and banter and humor to hold you through the tragedy that occurs in this book and like the death and trauma of the London bombings. I absolutely love this one, a historical fiction favorite. Another one that has to do with the London Blitz bombing is The Last Bookshop in London, and it's about a girl that goes to work at a bookshop and then the bombings kind of occurring, and again the different characters that she meets and the people and going through that trauma but coming together as a community and overcoming the odds kind of thing. But also the setting kind of plays a role and you get a feel of London during that time. Pivoting to another favorite that I read earlier this year is The Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting by Sophie Irwin. This one was a Regency romance, I think Bridgerton and Pride and Prejudice, but without any steamy scenes. This was a very sweet and fun romance and just a total great time. I loved reading this book. One that I read last year that also has to do with like high society people, set in Belgravia, called Belgravia by Julian Fellows. If you're familiar with the author name, he created Downton Abbey. There's also a PBS Masterpiece miniseries based on this book, and overall I really enjoyed it as well. A really good sense of place of what was happening in England with the Napoleonic Wars and the ramifications of that on the society, and also kind of this like high society dealing with secrets and drama and family dynamics. Next up and last for historical fiction is The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. I read this earlier this summer and this book totally lives up to the hype. This is a continuation, kind of retelling of Pride and Prejudice from the perspective of Mary Bennet, who's the sister that's kind of least mentioned in the books. She's misunderstood, and this is her story and her perspective, and it was so well done. It's a long book, but it's one of those that just felt right to sit in and to get to know the character, and I felt like it was very true to the original text. Speaking of the original text, let's transition into classics, and of course Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This was my first Jane Austen, my favorite Jane Austen. I haven't read them all yet, but this one is absolutely lovely and wonderful. If you haven't read it for whatever reason, do yourself a favor and read the book. Listen to the audiobook as well, narrated by Rosamund Pike on Audible, I believe. I listened to that and it was an incredible audiobook. Another one that I loved, and it's perfect for this spooky season, is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This one has a whole sense of place of this British manor and the gothic, ghostly, creepy vibes of the story unfolding. The atmosphere in this book is impeccable. It follows an unnamed character. She's newly married. She goes back to live in his home, and there's a bunch of mystery afoot about what happened to his former wife, and a lot of fun drama unfolds from there. And finally, for classics, I have The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. This one also has a really good sense of place on the Yorkshire moors, and this one of course is perfect for springtime, but it follows a young girl who's also sent to live in this mansion, and she's a total brat at first, but then she discovers covers friendship and different people and the love of nature and the outdoors, and it is a very fun and whimsy read. Transitioning into some middle grade, since that is technically a middle grade children's classic, I want to talk about Sweep. I read this for middle grade March, not this year but the year before, and absolutely loved it. This is a historical children's fantasy. It's set during Victorian London, so it'd be perfect for Victober actually, and it follows a young orphan girl who's a chimney sweep and has a beautiful story of friendship and coming together and found family. And it also gave some really interesting historical context of children that were used as chimney sweeps during that time period and how absolutely horrible those labor conditions were and children were dying, and there's a great author's note in that one. Another one that I read for that same middle grade reading vlog time period for middle grade March was A Place to Hang the Moon by Kate Albus, an absolute favorite of mine. This gave all of the Narnia feelings, even though this is a historical fiction and not a fantasy, but it has this beautiful sibling dynamic in the story. These three kids are sent off to the countryside while London is being bombed, and they're also newly orphaned, and they also have to find family and someone to take care of them. I just absolutely fell in love with the characters in this one. Next, one that has a very similar premise, a young girl and her brother are sent off to the English countryside during the Blitz, is The War That Saved My Life. But this one's a lot more hard-hitting. I would say The Place to Hang the Moon is more cozy and sweet and hopeful. The War That Saved My Life is a lot more intense and deals with child abuse and a young girl overcoming a lot of lies and terrible things that she was told her whole life. But it does have that found family aspect and kind of coming into yourself and learning what it means to be loved and cared for by someone else when all you've really known is heartache. And finally, for middle grade, I have to mention Harry Potter, of course. This is the first book, The Sorcerer's Stone, but I have the whole series right there. These are mostly set in a magical castle, but they do have moments in London and various places in England, and this is a British classic for a reason. Absolutely love this whole series, so it's definitely a favorite. Next, let me touch on some nonfiction. First up, The Salt Path by Rainer Wynn. This is an excellent memoir I would highly recommend for fans of Wild by Cheryl Strayed. Gave off the same kind of feel of this couple where life kind of falls apart around them. They become homeless and they decide to set off on this long, I believe it's like 630-mile path in England on the coast, and the husband is also struggling with a terminal illness. And so it has multiple components, and this book just made me feel a lot and grow in empathy, and it was beautifully written, had a lot of nature components because they camped all alongside England, so this one also had a wonderful sense of place. Another one that had a great sense of place and was a favorite last year is A Fine Romance, Falling in Love with the English Countryside by Susan Branch. This is a scrapbook diary photojournal kind of book, and it was just so wonderful to read, especially on the back end of going on my UK trip. This also follows a married couple where they go on a month-long trip to the UK and they drive around the countryside and they visit beautiful homes and gardens, and it was just the most cozy, wholesome read ever, and I absolutely loved it. Another one that's a series that's very beloved is All Creatures Great and Small by James Herriot. This is also set on the Yorkshire moors and follows a veterinarian and all of his escapades that he goes on. He basically kind of wrote these pocket stories of the people that he lived with, the animals that he encountered, his love life, and just all of the different escapades that he went on during his time being a veterinarian in England. I definitely want to try the PBS miniseries because I heard that is excellent and cozy as well. Next is Lady Elmina and the Real Downton Abbey. This one I picked up because I'm a big fan of Downton Abbey, and this talks about the actual building where the show was filmed, Highclere Castle, and some of the inspiration that permeated into the actual production of the show and the storyline of the show. This one is just a great moment of history talking about a singular female character and how she impacted her family and the things that happened in this huge Highclere Castle during different periods of history, like being a convalescent home during the war and that kind of thing. So as a fan of history and a fan of Downton Abbey, this was like the perfect mix of learning a little bit more, getting a little bit deeper, and it was a great historical nonfiction. The next nonfiction I want to talk about is The Marriage Bureau, this true story of how two matchmakers arranged love in wartime London. This one was a really fun read, and it was also told in a series of letters and diary entries with also some just historical narrative. But basically this is a story of two women who started the first matchmaking dating company in London because there were so many single people during the war and after the war that needed to find love or were looking for love, and they were like, hey, I know a lot of people, you know a lot of people, let's try to get some of these people together. And then they turned it into a business. And this one had a bit of a short story feel because it did tell short stories of these loves and romances, and also the background behind these two women and their personal lives and how they became friends and started this business together as well. But it was just like a sweet, hopeful, wholesome thing during a very tragic time in history. Another one that's told through a series of letters is 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene Hanff. This one's technically half set in England and half set in New York City. This is a nonfiction letter correspondence between Helene Hanff and a bookshop in London over the course of many years, and this is just very wholesome, very sweet, very feel good. It's very bookish and well written and just a really good time. I loved this when I read it. I listened to the audiobook, and that was also an excellent way to read this because I had someone narrating and reading the letters out loud to me. And finally, I will end with two thrillers actually that have have to do with England. The first one being 3 Hours by Rosamund Lupton. This was also a favorite of mine last year, and my goodness, what an intense and action-packed and beautifully written and marvelous thriller this was. This was very hard to read, but so good. This is set during a school shooting amidst a snowstorm. It also has a lot to unpack from a Syrian refugee immigrant perspective, and this one was just an absolute wild ride, but I would highly recommend. And finally, Playing Nice by J.P. Delaney. I haven't read this one in a while, but this is a thriller that's set in the UK, and it follows two separate families, two couples, and their kids were switched at birth, and I believe one has developmental issues and one does not. And there's a lot of drama and legal stuff that unfolds from there. It was a very interesting and well done thriller, and I remember really liking my time with that one. So that wraps up this video. Those are not all of the books that I've read that are set in England, but those are just a lot that I've really liked or loved and that have just been favorites that have stood the test of time over the last few years. And I love reading a book when I can get a sense of place, especially when I visited. So if you have any books that are your favorites that are set in England that you would recommend to me, please do so, because I always love to find new ones, especially that evoke, like I said, that sense of place. Thank you so much for watching today, and I will see you guys in another video soon. Bye.